Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories Podcast. My name is Tim Hannon.
And I'm Steve Wirt.
And as usual, we will deep dive into a topic of Pittsburgh sports past. This week, we're going to cover the 1995 Pittsburgh Steelers season. It was definitely an interesting season, and one that ended in heartbreak, unfortunately. So let's back up a little bit. The Steelers had fallen on some bad times in the 1980s. We actually covered that in a separate podcast, so go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. And in 1992, they hired a young coach named Bill Cowher, and Bill Cowher was a disciple of Marty Schottenheimer. And his formula was build a team around a strong running game, a very solid defense, and a game manager type quarterback. That was the Marty Ball formula for winning, and that was the Bill Cowher formula for winning. And Cowher found the perfect game manager quarterback in Neil O'Donnell. O'Donnell was the perfect QB for the kind of style Cowher wanted to play. He was not a gunslinger. He was a ball control quarterback who would rather take a sack than throw into tight coverage. And, you know, there were three Steeler quarterbacks who took the teams to Super Bowls. And O'Donnell was completely different than the other two guys, Terry Bradshaw and Ben Roethlisberger. Those guys, may have thrown for a lot of yards, may have also thrown a lot of interceptions. O'Donnell was a much more methodical and careful type quarterback.
Yeah, definitely not I would call him like a mediocre to solid quarterback. And he definitely had his limitations. He didn't have a quick release, and he couldn't get out of the way. He was pretty slow on his feet. So two things that, other quarterbacks that I guess we'll get into later in the podcast, make a nice comparison there. But Neil was pretty good at completing a pass when it was open, but if a guy wasn't open, like you said, he wouldn't take a chance with the ball, which, I guess you can lose more games doing that than win, but there does come a time when you gotta force it in there on a big play. So that was our Neil O'Donnell.
And so with O'Donnell and that Cowher kind of formula, the team sort of has immediate success. Cowher's first two seasons, they make the playoffs and are eliminated in the first playoff game in both of those years, but certainly the team's shown a lot of improvement after a lot of off years at the end of Chuck Noll's tenure. And then in 1994, everything sort of comes together. So that year, 1994, the Steelers have the number one rushing offense in the league. It's led by a trio of running backs, Barry Foster, who to this day actually still holds the Steeler record for rushing yards in a season. A rookie named Bam Morris, that was his nickname, Byron Bam Morris, because he was just this power kind of running back. And then John L. Williams, who is a veteran, who was a very solid player as well. And that year they also had the number two defense in the league. The defensive coordinator was a guy named Dom Capers, and the nickname that was given to Dom Capers' defense was Blitzburg, because that defense tended to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, force the quarterback to make mistakes. And that season, the Steelers were just dominant. They ended up with a 12-4 record. They were the number one seed in the AFC. And the main competition in the AFC that year was inside the division was the Cleveland Browns, who were coached by a guy you may have heard of named Bill Belichick. And we mentioned that the Steelers had the number two defense. The Browns actually had the number one defense in the league that year. And the Steelers and Browns played twice during the regular season. They were both really hard-fought games, and the Steelers won both, which basically just set up the fact that they would host the divisional playoff game where they'd meet Cleveland for a third time. And in that third game, the playoff game, the Steelers won, and I believe won pretty handily.
Oh, that's one of my favorite Steeler games of all time outside of the Super Bowls. They just absolutely smoked Bill Belichick, and no amount of cheating could help them that day mainly because their wide receivers dropped a lot of passes. There were some guys open early, But then the Steeler offense just kind of took over and shredded them for, that had to be 30 points.
Mm-hmm.
And Vinny Testaverde threw a couple interceptions late. So that was kind of the end of the Browns there for a very long time. They really haven't had much success since then. That's kind of their high water mark, which was nice. Nice to put our old buddy Bill Belichick, I guess. But that led up to where they're playing the Chargers, who were kind of an upstart team. They had upset the Marty Ball playing Chiefs, if I remember correctly, or was that no? That was the next year.
Yeah, that was the next year.
Yeah.
I think they had. Well, so that was interesting. So yeah, they're hosting now. The Steelers are hosting the championship game against the Chargers.
Yeah.
And you're right. They're like upstarts, and the Steelers are like huge favorites. They're 10-point favorites to beat the Chargers at home in the championship game. And the Chargers are this Cinderella team. But looking back on it, and I kind of thought that at the time. But looking back on it, if you really look at the context, the Chargers were the number 2 seed in the conference that year, and they had won the AFC West 2 out of the previous 3 seasons. So it wasn't like they came out of nowhere. They were an established good team. Bobby Ross was their coach.
Yeah, Stan Humphries was kind of like a Neil O'Donnell style quarterback, and they have Natron Means.
Yeah,
So they're kind of almost a carbon copy of the Steelers, and they had a pretty decent defense too.
Yeah, they had Junior Seau on defense, and you're right, it was a very similar style team. So they weren't really a Cinderella team, but nevertheless, the Steelers are huge favorites. I think everybody in Pittsburgh certainly expected the Steelers to roll over San Diego in the championship game.
I think especially because it was at home too.
Right.
And they kept, and that's the problem with stats sometimes. People look at like, oh, well, the Steelers never lose at home. Well, yeah, that was with like, Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, and the Steel Curtain defense, okay? Not the, quote my inner Rick Pitino. I don't see any of those guys walking through the door and not, this is a different team. And sometimes people get too caught up in like statistics that way.
Yeah, that's true. And so I think not only the fans expected them to win, the players did. Eric Green, the tight end for the Steelers, had infamously organized a Super Bowl rap video rehearsal in the team meeting room the week before the game. And I don't remember if that got leaked before the game or after the game, but they were planning a Super Bowl rap video already. I was at that game, and the excitement was just palpable because that was the first time that we played in a championship game at Three River Stadium since 1979 when the Steelers had won their 4th Super Bowl. So that was a long time. That was 15 years in between. And it was warm that day. It was like 60 degrees.
It was a weird,
Even though it was the middle of January. And the excitement was just through the roof. Everybody just thought, we're going to the Super Bowl. This is so exciting. And the game starts. The Steelers take a 13-3 lead in the second half. San Diego does, they really put all their focus on stopping that number 1 running game that the Steelers had, and they actually did a pretty good job of stopping the Steelers' running game. But the defense first game management formula is working for the Steelers, and you mentioned Steve Natron Means was their star running back. Defense was holding him in check. So you're kind of thinking, okay, this is just going to be one of those low-scoring, 16-7 kind of finishes. The defense is going to hold, and then all of a sudden, Stan Humphries, who, like you said, was sort of that middling, mediocre quarterback, he hits 2 43-yard touchdown passes. One is to their tight end, Alfred Papunu. That's on a play where he gets the defense to just bite badly on a play-action pass. And then late in the fourth quarter, a play that a lot of Steelers fans remember, he hits their receiver, Tony Martin, on a long touchdown pass. Martin beats Tim McKyer, the Steelers quarterback. That play was on a 3rd and 14.
Yeah, and Tim McKyer, that was the lesson learned from the previous years was the one year that they played the Bills, Rod Woodson got hurt and they didn't have a backup. So that was the whole reason they brought in Tim McKyer, was to give the other corners a break. I think it might have been, was that Deion Figures?
It was Figures and Woodson.
Yeah, but I think he was in for Figures at the time, and he got burned, and actually McKyer ended up winning a Super Bowl with San Francisco, I think.
Yeah.
So
well, he had
he wasn't
success.
he wasn't a bad player. He just I mean, 3rd and 14. Why? Yeah.
Yeah, they had brought him in as a veteran cornerback to sort of stabilize that third cornerback position. And yeah, you're right. It just, at the worst time, he got burnt. So now all of a sudden, San Diego has a lead, a 4-point lead late in the game. The Steelers make one last gasp drive. O'Donnell, who actually ends up throwing for over 300 yards in this game, leads them downfield. And the drive comes down to 4th and goal from the 3-yard line. They call timeout, and they call a quick pass over the middle to Barry Foster. And the linebacker for San Diego, Dennis Gibson, reads the play. He bats the pass down over the middle. The ball hits the turf, and the San Diego Chargers are going to the Super Bowl. And Three Rivers Stadium is just stunned. It was you could hear a pin drop. Again, no one really expected them to lose that game, and now San Diego's in the Super Bowl. And I think that hurt for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons was that was the era where the NFC team would just win the Super Bowl handily over the AFC team. That was a pattern. That had been a pattern for over a decade. It was always a blowout. The NFC team always won handily by more than 2 scores. And that year, the NFC Championship game was Dallas versus San Francisco. And Sports Illustrated, the cover of Sports Illustrated the week leading up to the championship games was Steve Young and Troy Aikman, and it said the real Super Bowl. The NFC Championship game was the real Super Bowl, and the AFC Championship game was an afterthought.
I always thought that was a leftover from the NFL-AFL merger, even though that was like 30 years. And so I always thought there was some of that bias going on. Now, I mean, like you said, Denver had gotten blown out a lot.
Denver and Buffalo.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't a lot. The AFC teams had rarely even kept it close, and they had lost at that point something like 11 or 12 in a row.
And would go on to lose 3 more times.
Well, and San Diego, I think, again, what hurt about that was San Diego goes into Super Bowl 29 against the 49ers, and they just get absolutely destroyed. I think
it wasn't
Jerry
even
Rice,
a game,
Jerry Rice burned their safeties on the second play from scrimmage or something. It wasn't even a game. And so for the Steelers, they don't make the Super Bowl, and then they kind of have this theme, 3 more yards, because they got stopped on the 3-yard line to end the season. And there was actually a sign that ends up hanging in the end zone the following season that says 3 more yards in reference to that, into that play, in the end zone where that play happened. So that's their theme heading into the next season. The offseason, though, brings a lot of changes. This is an era where NFL free agency is just beginning. Remember, the NFL did not have real free agency until, I believe it was 92, 93.
Yeah, Reggie White.
Yeah.
Reggie White went to Green Bay from Philadelphia.
Yep, I think I want to say that was 93. So free agency is very new at this point. And so the Steelers, along with the rest of the league, really is just learning how to navigate this. And you see some teams kind of going out and spending huge amounts of money and maybe not thinking about the ramifications in the salary cap. The Steelers kind of went the opposite way, where if a guy became a free agent, Tom Donahoe was the GM in that era. If a guy became a free agent, we just kind of let them go most of the time. And that year, Eric Green, who had led the team in receiving yards in '94, became a free agent. He signs with Miami. Gary Anderson, the kicker, the all-time great Steelers kicker who had been with the team for 13 seasons, signs as a free agent with the Eagles. And then Barry Foster, who wasn't a free agent, but was threatening to hold out and had some other antics going on. They just said, you know what, we're done with you, and they released him. So really, your offense is going through massive change. On the defensive side, it was pretty stable. I don't think they lost any key players on the defensive side. However, they did lose their defensive coordinator, Dom Capers. He leaves to become the head coach of the expansion Carolina Panthers. So really on offense, you have you had this sort of run first formula. Is that still going to work without Foster, Green, and Anderson? The offensive coordinator at that time is Ron Earhart. He had been the offensive coordinator since Cowher's first year, and then he had previously been the offensive coordinator under Bill Parcells when they were winning Super Bowls in New York. But they also had a wide receiver coach named Chan Gailey, who had an increasingly larger and larger say in the offense. especially into 1995, and actually would end up getting promoted to be the offensive coordinator in 1996. So they lose those key players. The running backs are now Bam Morris, and they signed a free agent, Eric Pegram, who ends up becoming an important player.
All 5 foot one of them.
Yeah, short player, but sort of a shifty player.
Running back. Yeah, he was a good little, like, nice chain. They had a nice 1-2 punch there
Right.
with those two.
Right.
Yeah, thunder and lightning.
So that ended up working out. And then on the receiver side, again, Green, the tight end, was their leading receiver. The wide receivers were totally unproven. The wide receivers were Yancey Thigpen, Andre Hastings, Ernie Mills, and Charles Johnson. And none of those guys had ever caught more than 40 balls in a season. So just a totally unproven group of wide receivers.
Well, Yancey Thigpen, it's an odd numbered year, so he's good. He's only good in odd number year.
That's true. That's true. But he hadn't started.
He had a bad feet. He had a lot of injuries to his feet, so I think that took a toll.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
But he was still a good wide receiver.
Well, he was, but I think heading into 1995, nobody knew that yet.
Yeah.
You know, he hadn't done anything yet. In the draft, they in the first round they picked the tight end Mark Bruner to replace Green, and then in the second round, so in 1995, O'Donnell's heading into the final year of his contract. And again, the trend has sort of been let these guys go rather than attempt to get into a bidding war. And so in the second round, they drafted a quarterback, Cordell Stewart. And Cordell was definitely a very different kind of quarterback than Neil O'Donnell, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely an option quarterback, runner, strong arm, not the most accurate. Really didn't know how to read a defense at that point in his career. I would say also kind of as a more overarching theme. You got to remember in '92, that's when Sid slid. So I think the city sports-wise had gone through kind of a traumatic event there. And then 2 years later, it's well, now it's the Steelers, and that never happens to the Steelers. And it's kind of almost history repeating itself, where the Steelers lose to this underdog team that everybody thought they should have beat. You know, it's kind of like the Pirates, and then Barry Bonds leaves. Well, now it's kind of happening again to the Steelers. It's all the free agents are leaving. So I think in general, sports fans in the city were starting to kind of, is this how it's going to be for Pittsburgh now? We're going to kind of be like Buffalo or Kansas City, where you just never quite get there, and then all your players, you lose them to the bigger markets. So
that's a really interesting parallel. I never thought about that, and you're right. And I think that was probably a lot of fans. You know, when I was researching this and looking at some of the old articles, it sounded like there was a lot of gloom and doom heading into that '95 season. And I think what you just described is probably why the fans felt that way.
Did Leon Searcy leave that? No, he left the year after.
They lost an offensive lineman. I think it was Duval Love that year. So they did lose an offensive lineman.
But I remember they lost Searcy in the next couple of years too. It was kind of like a continuing trend.
It was. They ended up losing a lot of players during that era.
Chad Brown.
Yeah. They never really figured out until probably 7-8 years in, really until Kevin Colbert came, I think, how to really manage the salary cap and free agency. And you don't see that anymore, but you're right. At the time, it felt like the Pirates. Yeah. Oh, okay, we lost. Now all of our best players leave, and we're just going to stink. So there was a lot of question marks heading into that season. And again, on the defensive side of the ball, still the same core players, but you have a new defensive coordinator. It's a guy named Dick LeBeau, who was the defensive backs coach. And not a lot of people knew much about Dick LeBeau. Obviously, today, a lot of people in Pittsburgh know who Dick LeBeau is. And he led 4 different defenses for the Steelers to 4 different Super Bowls.
So. I don't know why he was a defensive backs coach, because he was a defensive coordinator in Cincinnati in the Super Bowl under Weiss. So, boy, the Steelers really got a steal there with coaching. They really stole a coach there.
They did, yeah. That's a good question. Why was he not just the defensive coordinator somewhere else? But I guess his star was not as bright at the time.
Yeah.
So he got promoted, and the defense, ends up having a really good replacement for Dom Capers. So they head into the season. The very first game is at home against the Detroit Lions, and Detroit had a running back named Barry Sanders. And if you're too young to remember Barry Sanders playing, go look up, just go to YouTube and type Barry Sanders highlights, because Barry Sanders might have been the most exciting football player I've ever watched. He was just fun to watch. He made these amazing runs. He just an all-time great football player. and didn't play against the Steelers. Certainly didn't play in Pittsburgh very much because
Not
he was
very
in the
much.
NFC.
No, yeah.
So, he's coming to Three River Stadium, and the big fear is, oh my gosh, how are we going to stop Barry Sanders? And the defense actually does a pretty good job stopping him. He has 100 yards in this game, but he doesn't reel off any of those huge, 60-yard Barry Sanders runs.
Yeah, Barry Sanders was a different kind of running back. Like, he wasn't 3 yards in a cloud of dust. He was more of a game breaker. And I think that kind of hurt Detroit in that area. Like, they never could quite figure out how to consistently use it. I mean, I couldn't imagine, like, if he would have been like a Rich Rodriguez spread offense. Oh my gosh, talk about the perfect like all one-on-one matchups for Barry Sanders. That would have been like a dream offense for him. But
Barry Sanders retired early, and I think he's still like the third all-time leading rusher. If he would have played in like one of those modern spread offenses, or if he would have been behind like the Dallas offensive line of that era,
yeah.
I mean, he would have had.
And he never really had a great quarterback. They had all kind of mediocre to not very good. I mean, Rodney Peete, Eric Kramer. But
yeah. I mean, he definitely could have had a career that would have never been matched. But anyway, the big damage that he does in this game, sadly for the Steelers, is he's running outside on the Three Rivers turf, and he makes a cutback. Rod Woodson is chasing him. Rod Woodson tries to cut back, plants his foot on the Three Rivers turf, which is basically concrete, and tears his ACL and is presumably out for the season.
That was bad, yes.
That was real bad. That same game, the Steelers also lost O'Donnell and the backup quarterback, Mike Tomczak, on a very violent hit.
Oh, that was like the one where Mike Tomczak, like, he was scrambling, and if he would have turned any other direction except for the way he turned, he turned literally into a defensive lineman.
One of the most violent hits. I don't know how he got up from that. And so they're down to their third-string quarterback, who's Jim Miller. But they fight through. The game's tied 20-20 in the final seconds, and they have a chance to win it on a field goal attempt.
How do we have like 4 quarterbacks that ended up winning 13 games? Yeah. Do you realize every one of those quarterbacks, like, eventually somewhere, like Jim Miller ended up winning 13 games for Chicago. Tomczak, well, maybe Tomczak didn't win 30, but he won like 10 or 11 with us one year.
All four of those
Cordell,
guys.
Even Cordell probably was a healthy scratch, ended up having a 30. Like,
all 4 of those guys won divisions, I think. You could say, I think, and you're right, all 4 were on the roster at that time. That's interesting. I didn't think about that, but you're right. So they trot out, for the game-winning field goal, they trot out Norm Johnson, who is a 14-year veteran who was signed literally like 2 days before the opening game. Because, again, Gary Anderson had left. The guy they had signed to replace him was a guy named Dean Biasucci, who just had a disastrous preseason, and they had to cut him. And they had to pick up Norm Johnson and say, hey, welcome to the team. Can you please go out and kick the game-winning field goal on opening day, which Norm Johnson does. Norm Johnson actually ends up being a pretty reliable kicker for the next few years. So they win, but it's a pretty costly win. O'Donnell is out for about a month. I think he broke his hand. But Tomczak had proven to be a really capable backup quarterback. He had won some very key games the year before during that march to the championship game the year before. So that wasn't too bad. And O'Donnell was coming back. The loss of Woodson was really the big disaster. There's just no way to quantify what Woodson meant to the team at that point. We mentioned in one of the previous podcasts, Steve and I were born sort of in the mid-'70s. We didn't have the opportunity to see Joe Green and Jack Lambert and Mel Blount. But in my opinion, post-'70s, Rod Woodson's the greatest post-'70s Steeler. I mean, just in my humble opinion.
Can I do you one better? Rod Woodson's the best defensive back to play in the NFL. Sorry, Deion Sanders and Richard Sherman, those guys. I mean, the guy was an All-Pro at corner and safety. Probably should have played safety, but was fast enough to play corner. Has more interceptions than Deion Sanders, and don't tell me about nobody throwing at him. Whatever, Deion had more punt returns than Deion. Has more fumbles and interceptions returned than Deion. So Deion is a great player, but Rod Woodson was better, and he could tackle people.
And Rod Woodson was very clutch. Like, Rod Woodson just could come up with that big, huge play whenever you needed it.
Well, he could tackle people, too.
Right.
I'm sorry, tackling is part of football.
Right.
And if you don't want to do it, that's great, but Rod Woodson is, I argue that to I'm blue in the face is much better than Deion Sanders.
So yeah. I mean,
But that shows you the size of the loss too. I mean,
right.
and we haven't even mentioned they lost
Well,
the
yeah.
other corner
So right. So it's not only it's a disaster because you lose, like you said, possibly the greatest defensive back in NFL history, but you also going into that season, the other starting cornerback was Deion Figures, who was driving around Los Angeles at like 3 a.m. and was shot in the knee, and it was just a totally random act of violence, really unfortunate. And he came back from the injury, but he never really came back, and so he doesn't really play a whole lot that season. So now they're down. They're starting 2 cornerbacks for most of the season. And the starting cornerbacks at this point were a third-year guy named Willie Williams, who we'll talk a little bit more about later, and then a journeyman named Alvoid Mays. And at least initially, those 2 guys really could not cut it. So week 2, they go down to Houston. They win. They're 2-0. But the defense, and especially the secondary, really starts to come unglued. They dropped 2 games in a row. One's at Miami. One's at home against Minnesota. The home game they dropped against Minnesota, Steve, I don't know if you remember this, but the referees called a too many men on the field penalty.
Yeah, and there was only 11, yeah.
And there was actually 11 guys that messed it up. And Cowher got a photo of the play because they do those little overhead photos. And he ran up to the referee and he stuffed it in his pocket and he said, "Look at the picture." That call ended up actually not being crucial because Minnesota won that game by a lot of points. So now it's 2-2. Again, the defense is definitely not looking good. They come back and they have a rematch with San Diego. They win that game, and O'Donnell comes back. So now you're thinking, okay, maybe we'll right the ship here. But then they drop 2 more games, and this time it was against bad teams. Minnesota and Miami were good teams. Now they drop a game in Jacksonville against the expansion Jaguars, who, again, were an expansion team, not very good. That was a shocker. And then they come back home and they play a Thursday night game against Cincinnati at the River Stadium, and they just get throttled by Jeff Blake, the Bengals quarterback. Steve and I had the unfortunate pleasure of attending this game together back then. Steve, what do you remember about Jeff Blake on that Thursday night?
I remember Carl Pickens. They couldn't cover Carl Pickens at all, and like Jeff Blake loved to throw them rainbows. His ball would be like 40 yards in the air, but like you said, Alvoid Mays was not up to the task at that point. It was panic time. Like Alvoid was definitely like, come back, please, wait for me. Like he just wasn't fast enough to play corner in the NFL. I mean, neither am I, so who am I to criticize Alvoid Mays?
Yeah.
But
yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. So now after dropping that game, the Steelers are 3-4. So you're heading into the season, with a lot of question marks, and you're heading into the season really wanting to redeem that whole loss in the championship game, and you're 3-4, and now it's kind of looking like, boy, this is going to be a lost season. And so at this point, adjustments are made on both sides of the ball. On offense, because these 4 losses are kind of down a lot, they end up throwing the ball more, and they decide to sort of shift away from that run-first formula that they had so much success with. And again, like we mentioned, Chan Gailey, he starts having more and more influence over the offense. And the team starts opening it up in the air, and they start employing 4 and 5 wide receiver sets, which would have been unheard of previously under Cowher, or Knoll for that matter, right? Just the sight of the Steelers lining up with 4 or 5 wide receivers was just a strange sight.
I don't think a lot of teams in the league did that back then either, really.
Compared to today, definitely not.
Yeah.
Yep. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Carnell Lake, who is the starting strong safety, is asked to move to cornerback because, as you said, Steve, they did not have any options really at cornerback. And I found an interview with Carnell Lake years later where he was recounting Dick LeBeau coming to him and asking him to play cornerback, and he thought it was crazy, but he agreed to do it. And that ends up being a huge decision.
Yeah, he ended up playing well. Well, I think what they figured out was they had another guy that could play safety better than Alvoid Mays could play corner.
Right. I think it was Chris Oldham was the other safety.
Yeah, so Chris Oldham was serviceable at safety, and if Cardinal Lake could just not be mediocre at corner, you were already ahead of the game. And I think that was kind of the calculation. It took them a couple weeks to figure that out, but that's good coaching by LeBeau and Cower, on their part. You gotta win with the team you have, not the team you had last year. So it was a great move by them.
Yeah.
Saved their season because they were 3-4 at that point. And
Right.
I forget the stats back then that not a lot of teams had made the playoffs at 3-4. Now it seems almost commonplace, but
And that's
back then
3-4 is like halfway through the season.
yeah, it's seven games.
It's
yeah.
different than 1 and 2, right? It's like that's deep into the season. Yeah, and you're right. That did save the season, and I think you're right. It was a really brilliant coaching move, and Cardinal Lake's one of those Steelers. When you list like the all-time great Steelers, he's not often in that conversation. I think he should be. I think he's like an underrated all-time great Steeler because there's all the success they had during that era. I don't think they have that success without Cardinal Lake.
He definitely solidified the secondary, which helped. He really was. He was a linebacker in college, which is odd that normally linebackers don't move to corner.
Right.
But like once again, he was kind of a hybrid. He's like almost ahead of his time. But that was the Dick LeBeau defense. Was you can go one of two ways. You can either get the skinny linebacker or the fat safety. So he was kind of like a skinny linebacker, quite honestly, and that worked out well for him. And it worked out well for the Steelers.
The Dick LeBeau defenses were always built around that strong safety too, like Troy Polamalu in the 2000s, and it was really Cardinal Lake in the 90s. So that starts to right the ship. And the good news for the Steelers is that the AFC Central division that year is not very good. The Bengals and Oilers are mediocre teams. The Jaguars are an expansion team. They're pretty bad. And the main competition for the Steelers that year was supposed to be Cleveland again. They again, those were the two best teams in the conference the year before, and a lot of people had picked Cleveland to go to the Super Bowl in '95, but that was the year that Art Modell announced in the middle of the season that he was going to move the franchise to Baltimore, and that just completely torpedoed the season for the Browns. And so really, the Steelers are still in a good spot even at 3-4. Because the division's so bad. Cower pulls the team in and he says, you know what, we're starting a 9-game season. Next week is week 1 of our 9-game season. It's a fresh slate. And I don't know how much that factored in to the success that they had after that, but it certainly seemed to work and everybody seemed to buy into it. So they start this fresh 9-game season. They play Jacksonville again. This time they win. They get back to 500. And then the following week, they play in Chicago in what I think is one of the more underrated great games of the Cower era. The Steelers playing in Chicago in '95. The Bears are in first place in the NFC Central Division at this point. They have one of the league's best offenses. And the Steelers-Bears series, which had dated back to 1933, the Steelers had never won a game in Chicago before that. So every game that they played at Soldier Field before that, they had lost.
That's not hard to believe.
Yeah. But I mean, even the 70s, like it's just, they didn't win even once through that whole era.
Well, how many times did they play?
Not often, but you'd think they'd win one.
Yeah.
And so they go out there, and the game quickly turns into a shootout. There's 4 ties and 5 lead changes, not to mention a combined 9 turnovers. And the game's tied in the fourth quarter. O'Donnell throws a bad pick 6, and the Bears take a 34-27 lead. The Bears then have a chance to ice the game on a 44-yard field goal attempt, but their kicker, Kevin Butler, he misses the kick. Kevin Butler was their kicker, was a longtime kicker for that team. I believe he was the kicker on the Super Bowl 20, the 85 Bears team.
Oh, wow.
So he'd been with the team for many years, and when he missed that field goal, after the game, he blamed the Soldier Field turf, which he called, quote, a piece of bleep, and said the Bears have no pride and the city has no pride. And that was sort of the end of Kevin Butler's time in Chicago. But that aside, that gave the Steelers another chance. O'Donnell put together a 65-yard drive. And at this point, the wide receivers are starting to really come up clutch. in some of these games. Hastings and Charles Johnson both had key third down receptions to keep the drive alive, and then O'Donnell hit Ernie Mills for an 11-yard touchdown to cap the drive with just over a minute left in the game. And Cowher actually lined up to go for the 2-point conversion to win, but the Bears called timeout. Cowher changes his mind, kicks the extra point, goes into overtime. In overtime, O'Donnell leads another drive, which sets up a game-winning field goal. So the Steelers come out of Chicago with a win, with a 5-4 record. They now have the lead in the AFC Central Division, and it's a lead they will never relinquish the rest of the season.
That is an underrated game, yeah, because it switched from, like you said, the run-heavy defense first to the passing. 341 yards. That was outside of the AFC Championship game the year before. It was a big game for good old Neal there.
Well, and he threw 52 passes in that game.
Yeah, they threw the ball a lot.
Yeah, which again was, and that was not like we were down by 20 points and you're just throwing the ball.
Yeah.
That was a tight game the whole way through. And O'Donnell threw 52 passes. So you're right, Steve. It's significant. They needed to win, obviously, and keep pace. But also, it really marks the shift from that old kind of run-first, defense-first mentality into a new era of the Steelers' offense. And it proved that they could compete in games that were shootouts. That game was a shootout. The Bears had a good offense. The Bears were scoring. The Steelers kept matching them, and the Steelers ended up having the ball last, so to speak. And that was not the way the Steelers were used to winning games. So very significant. After that, the Steelers would go on an 8-game winning streak. They would clinch the division. They would lock down the number 2 seed in the AFC. And that offense just kept rolling the whole time. So a few memorable games down the stretch. Week 11, they played a Monday Night Football game at home against the Browns. That was scheduled as a Monday Night Football game because, again, that was supposed to be the big rematch, Steelers versus Browns, and it kind of turned into a wake. There were a lot of Browns fans standing outside Three River Stadium protesting, and a lot of Steelers fans wore orange armbands into the game to sort of show our support for the Cleveland fans. It just was strange because 94 was the height of that rivalry. All the years that the Steelers and Browns played each other, it was never as intense and as meaningful as it was in 1994, and it's never been that intense or meaningful since. And you go from that to wearing orange armbands, feeling sorry for their fans and their city. It was just a real weird shift. The game itself, the Steelers won, and the significant part about that game was it was really the game where they started to use Cordell Stewart. I think you said like those first couple games he was probably just a healthy scratch. He was the 4th-string quarterback because they had decided to keep 4 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
But when they started employing those 5 wide receiver sets, I forget who the 5th wide receiver was. I want to say like Johnny Barnes or Corey Holiday, but whoever that 5th receiver was hurt, and they didn't have another 5th receiver. So they brought Cordell in to be the 5th receiver, and they also started using him under center to run like gadget plays or option plays. And in that Cleveland Monday night game, he had a great play where he took a snap and he ran all the way to one side of the field.
And then he went all the way, yeah.
All the way to the other side of the field and threw a touchdown pass to Mills. It was...
The defensive genius couldn't figure that one out.
Yep.
Sorry, it never gets old taking shots at Belichick.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was really...
Cheat your way on that one.
That was really the only time we ever got the better of Bill Belichick, so you gotta bask in it while you can. So they beat Cleveland. Another big game was Week 12. They play at Cincinnati, and just like in that first matchup, Jeff Blake starts throwing those rainbows that you talked about, and the Bengals actually go up 31-13. So once again, they're blowing out the Steelers because the defense has no answer for Jeff Blake. This time, instead of getting blown out, the offense comes back, scores 36 unanswered points on 5 second-half touchdowns.
I actually watched that game like a while back. I don't destroy the set again. Sorry, Dave. Stop. I don't know. I'm klutzing. Sorry,
Okay,
Dave.
so on 5 second-half touchdowns, and go.
Yeah, Cordell was open over the middle a lot. Neal O'Donnell didn't like to throw the ball over the middle for some reason. And Cordell, where they had him, he was going over the middle a lot. And once he started throwing over the middle, they had no answer, and that was really, really what kind of the catalyst for the offense that day was Cordell Stewart.
Yeah, Cordell has a 71-yard touchdown reception in that game, and I
He was
believe it was
open a
over the
lot
middle.
more too. Even in the earlier game, that Thursday night game, I remember, like you pointed him out, he came out and he was open and he wouldn't throw him the ball. So I don't know. It was kind of another little Neil O'Donnell bugaboo, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and at this point, whatever that bugaboo was, I think they had figured it out. O'Donnell had 377 yards in that game. So again, the offense continues to roll. Week 16, they play at home against the Patriots. That's another high-scoring shootout game. It's tied at 27 with 2 minutes left. And O'Donnell hits Ernie Mills on a 62-yard bomb where he gets behind the safety. And that's how they beat New England, is on a 62-yard bomb with 2 minutes left. So all of these games, really, the thread through all these games is the Steelers winning unlike they did at any other time under Cowher, either before that and probably after that too. They weren't playing ball control. They weren't relying on the defense to hold a lead late in the fourth quarter and force a turnover to hold the 3-point lead. They were relying heavily now on what is now a very dynamic offense to make big plays and to win shootouts. So the regular season ends with the Steelers having the 5th-rated offense in the NFL, and that would have been higher had we had the 3 and 4 part of the season not existed. Yancey Thigpen finishes with 85 receptions and 1,300 yards. He gets selected to the Pro Bowl. O'Donnell throws for a career-high 247 yards per game. Pegram actually ends up leading the team in rushing. You mentioned he was kind of small. I think that fit the offense that year because they could throw to him out of the backfield. They could do draw plays, things of that nature. They didn't have the power running game. And that was also by necessity because Bam Morris, the power running back, had a setback that season. He had showed up to training camp overweight and ended up losing a lot of his playing time to Pegram, although Bam would end up being key in the postseason. We'll get to that later. So the offense, again, really dynamic. The defense, certainly, without Woodson, is nowhere near as dominant as they were in 1994, but they're still fairly tough to play against. Lake, it's such a testament to him. He gets selected to the Pro Bowl as a cornerback. So he makes that move to cornerback and gets selected to the Pro Bowl as a cornerback. Greg Lloyd and Kevin Green also made the Pro Bowl as linebackers. Ray Seals, the defensive end, he had 9 sacks that year. And they also had these very young inside linebackers who were really starting to contribute, Chad Brown and Levon Kirkland, who would both become very key players in the near future. And then Willie Williams, we talked about Willie Williams, had got thrown in there a cornerback on the other side of Carnell Lake and really struggled early. He overcame that. He actually finished the year with 7 interceptions, which is a lot. I mean, 7 interceptions is nothing to sneeze at. He was kind of an undersized player, but he was one of those guys that always played. I always felt like he played above his pay grade.
He ended up having a successful career. I think he had a long career in the NFL and a solid player. Just one of those solid kind of glue player guys that you need. A good solid. I don't know if he's kind of in between a backup and a starter. Maybe not a Pro Bowl starter, but a good player, and you can count on him when you need him. And he definitely bailed us out this season.
He did, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned his long career. A fun fact about Willie Williams: he's the only Steeler player to be on the roster for both Super Bowl 30 and Super Bowl 40.
Wow.
Yeah.
Willie was around a while.
He was. I think Super Bowl 40, he was on his second stint with the Steelers. He had gone to, I think, Seattle for a bunch of years and then come back. But yes, he did have a pretty long career. So the Steelers are in the playoffs. The first playoff game in the divisional round is against the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo, we kind of talked about them earlier. They had won the AFC 4 times in a row. They were this great team with a know-how-to offense. By 1995, that was definitely starting to waver. They weren't the same team they were, but they still had those Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed. And then that year, specifically on defense, they led the league in sacks. They had a really strong defense, and they had the Defensive Player of the Year. Bryce Popp, their linebacker, was the NFL's Defensive Player of the Year. So they're really, really strong defense. The Steelers catch a little bit of a break in this game. Bruce Smith, the Hall of Fame defensive lineman, doesn't even make the trip to Pittsburgh. He's bedridden with the flu. So that's sort of a lucky break for the Steelers, because it wasn't even like an on-the-field injury. He literally like couldn't get out of bed with the flu. I remember the days leading up to that game, there was a lot made of the fact the Bills had a private plane ready to go in case, like, Saturday morning, the game was on a Saturday. So Saturday morning he woke up and all of a sudden was feeling better. They were going to take a private plane and fly him to Pittsburgh and somehow get him to Three Rivers Stadium in time for the game. That never happened. The game itself wasn't very close. The Steelers jumped out to a big lead early. Greg Lloyd hurt Jim Kelly. Alex Van Pelt, the former Pitt quarterback, came into the game for a while. Jim Kelly came back into the game. The Bills started to mount a comeback in the second half of that game, largely off the back of 2 bad Neil O'Donnell interceptions. Insert foreshadowing here. But it's really not that close. And Bam Morris has 106 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. So we mentioned Bam kind of had a disappointing season, but in the playoffs he kind of roars back, and in this game he's dominant. So the Steelers beat the Bills. Now they're back in the AFC Championship game again, and this time the opponent is the Indianapolis Colts. And, we talked about, was San Diego really a Cinderella team or not? Indianapolis was for sure a Cinderella team. The Colts back then, again, you have to remember this in context, because I think when you think of the Colts today, you think of Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck and a lot of successful teams that they had. In 1995, they were seen as one of the worst teams, one of the worst franchises really in the league. Between 1978 and 1994, they made the playoffs once, and they lost their one playoff game that they played in. They were viewed as a poorly run organization. They had drafted John Elway in 1983. Elway refused to play for them, and they had to trade him. They had moved from Baltimore to Indianapolis in the middle of the night under the cover of darkness, and they were infamous for drafting poorly. There was one year, I think it was 1992, where they had not only the number 1 pick in the draft, they had the number 2 pick in the draft. They had the first 2 picks, which is like unheard of. You could build a dynasty with the first 2 picks in the draft, and they blew them both. They drafted Steve Ettman and Quentin Coriat, who were both busts. And they were so bad at drafting, Mel Kiper, the ESPN analyst, you remember this, Steve? He got into a fight with their general manager. I don't remember the details. I just remember they were like arguing on the air.
Yeah, that was in the middle of like ESPN's draft coverage. Like, why'd you pick this guy? Well, we like him. It's like,
and I think the Colts general manager said, who the heck is Mel Kiper? Yeah. But Mel Kiper wasn't wrong. I mean, the Colts were just not a good franchise. They weren't good at anything, playing football, drafting players, what have you.
Rosenblum owned the team in the 80s, and he was the guy who moved them to Indianapolis. And then now, I don't know if Irsay had come in yet, but they've had some kind of shaky ownership over the years out there in Colts land.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and it was just, everybody knew the Colts. The Colts are just one of the bad teams. That was that way for years. And really, 1995 wasn't all that different, because they hovered around 500 for most of that season. I mean, really, the only difference was they were mediocre instead of just really bad.
They had Marshall Faulk too. That's a pretty good guy to have on your team.
Yeah, that was one draft pick that they hit on, was Marshall Faulk, and their quarterback was a guy named Jim Harbaugh, who is currently the head coach at the University of Michigan. At that time, he was a veteran NFL quarterback who had flamed out with the Chicago Bears. He had infamously had like a huge fight on the sidelines with Mike Ditka. It was a lot of up and down for him in Chicago.
If you have him and Tom Zach on the same team, you're going to have a little bit of that's too many alpha dogs in the room there. Him and Ditka too. My goodness. Oof.
Right. Yeah. Well, now that Harbaugh's been a coach for many years, and we sort of know his personality better, like you said, you can see why.
Well, Tom Zach's the same way, and Ditka's the same way. So could you imagine all three of them?
A lot of headbutting.
Yeah,
exactly. So he flamed out in Chicago. He went to Indianapolis. I don't even think he was a starter when he went there, but he became the starter. And in 1995, again, they're hovering around 500 most of the season, but the games that they're winning, it's because they're very close games, and Harbaugh is leading them to last-minute drives, and he earns the nickname Captain Comeback. So they squeezed into the playoffs, and even though they squeezed into the playoffs as a wild card, nobody really expected much of them, especially after the first series of the first playoff game. Marshall Faulk got hurt. So like you said, he was Hall of Fame running back, their best player, and he's hurt on the first series, never came back.
But they had Lamont Warren.
They had Lamont Warren,
who was pretty good.
Yeah, and
I mean, he's not Marshall Faulk, but he's a serviceable running back.
Right, serviceable running back, but still, I wouldn't say anybody expected them to make any noise in the playoffs. But they won at San Diego, and then the following week they go to Kansas City, and they pull off just a massive upset of the Chiefs.
That was Marty Ball. That was Lynn Elliott missing, like, oh my goodness.
I think he missed like 3 field goals.
Yeah, and he looked like a Viking while doing it. He was wearing like chainmail on his head or something. It's like, what were you? Lynn Elliott, that was bad. Kansas City should have never lost that game.
But they did.
Yeah, they did.
And so now the Steelers are hosting the AFC Championship game, and I think there's a lot of consternation on the part of Steeler fans. I know I felt it because of the way the previous season had ended. And I think everyone was expecting Steelers at Arrowhead for the championship game. Now we're hosting the championship game, which is great, but now we're once again playing a team that we're favored to beat by a lot of points. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is deja vu. And I don't think that any of the anxiety was lessened after the first pass of the game. O'Donnell threw an interception, the Colts kick a field goal, and again, you're kind of thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to happen again, right? But the Steelers steady themselves. They take the lead right before halftime thanks to a Cordell touchdown reception.
Which wouldn't have been. I remember an article in the paper like after that happened, like because like the chief had been dead, like, oh, maybe the chief from heaven blew a little smoke in the referee's eyes, because Cordell had stepped out and then caught the pass.
He had stepped out of bounds.
Yeah.
That should not have been a touchdown. It was a bad call, and there was no instant replay back then. So that was a lucky play that benefited the Steelers. And the game's kind of tight. The game's kind of close all the way into the fourth quarter. Steelers still have the lead. And then Harbaugh hits Floyd Turner, wide receiver, on a 47-yard touchdown bomb down the left sideline, and it gives the Colts a 16-13 lead.
I think I remember punching the couch at home at that point. Yeah. Well,
because it was the same thing. It was just like the previous year. We're up in the fourth quarter, and the other team throws a long touchdown pass against our vaunted defense to give them the lead. And so it is literally deja vu. And the only hope was, okay, but this year the offense is different. The offense is going to bail us out. But on the ensuing possession, the Steelers go 3 and out and have to punt the ball back to the Colts. And now with about 3 minutes left in the game, the Colts have a 3rd and 1 at their own 30-yard line with a chance to potentially ice the game. And Lamont Warren, who you mentioned before, Steve, was a starting running back at this point for Indianapolis. They hand off to him, and he goes to his left, and he has a hole the size of Canada to run through, literally.
Yeah, it was big. It was.
He's going to get the 1 yard for sure. He's probably going to get 30, 40 more yards because there was nobody on that side of the field. And Willie Williams, who we said is playing way above his pay grade this season, literally comes from the other side of the line of scrimmage and tackles Lamont Warren from behind.
By like his shoe.
Yeah,
it wasn't even like he got a good tackle. He just grabbed his foot and held on for dear life.
And he tackles him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get the 1 yard. And the Colts have to punt the ball back. It is one of the most underrated great plays. If I had to list the top 10 plays in Steeler history, I think I'd put that on there because it was so significant. The season was over if he doesn't make that play. Yeah. And the fact and the athleticism that it took to make that play is just unbelievable. So now the Steelers have the ball back. They're in the same spot again. The offense is in the same spot with a chance to put together a drive to send them to the Super Bowl. O'Donnell starts leading him downfield, but he throws an errant pass right into the arms of Quentin Coryatt.
He hit him right between the 5 and the 5.
Exactly, yeah.
He hit him perfectly.
Yeah. And Ernie Mills, who's coming across the field, who I think the pass was intended for, makes a great play to stick his arm in there and break up the interception because that was, again, the game was over. The drive eerily comes down to a 4th and 3 around midfield. So once again, we need 3 more yards. This time they
And TV
convert
kept showing like the
the
sign.
sign.
Yeah,
I know. It was gut wrenching.
And Phil Simms was in the tank for the Colts.
And so
Yeah.
and so they convert it though. They convert it this time with a pass to Hastings, and then the big play on this drive, O'Donnell airs out a pass down the right sideline to Ernie Mills, who hauls it in at the 1 yard line, and then 2 plays later, Bam Morris punches it in, and with a minute and a half left, the Steelers take the lead, 20-16. And if you watch the broadcast on NBC, there's a bunch of just dramatic shots after Bam punches it in.
Yeah, like the stands used to roll out, and like I remember the stands bouncing and
Yes.
the Cowers celebrating, and
Yeah, you're right. The Cowers family's up there hugging and crying.
Yeah.
John Jackson, who is the offensive tackle for the Steelers, just a huge 300-something pound guy, was pointing at the ref, waiting for him to signal touchdown. And when the ref put his arms up in the air, John Jackson leapt about 20 feet into the air. And then the other shot, you and I were talking about this before the broadcast, Steve, that Neil O'Donnell walks off the field and he blows a kiss
to the sign,
to the stands, and I think he kind of knew that was his last play in Three River Stadium. But there's still a minute and a half left. The game's not over. The Colts get the ball back, and Captain Comeback still has time for another comeback. He marches them down the field. The game comes down to a Hail Mary attempt in the corner of the end zone. And Hail Marys in football, I don't know what the statistics are, but maybe like a 2% success rate?
It's not. Well, they were at the 30 or the 29, so it wasn't like.
But he still
it wasn't. It made the end zone.
He still, yeah. So sometimes
Randy Fuller knocked it out, who ironically was wearing number 29.
That's right. Randy Fuller batted it, and the receiver was a guy named Aaron Bailey, who it kind of went through his arms.
Well, then he tried to fake it, like, I caught it, and then Phil Simms, who was too busy putting on his Colts jersey, started saying, he caught it. Oh.
Yes. And then
all of a sudden the ref signaled it wasn't, and Phil decided to cry because he was really upset because the Colts didn't win.
Yeah, I'll never forget. That's ingrained into my brain. Phil Simms screaming, he caught it. Because that's all I heard. I didn't see the referee signal incomplete. I just heard Phil Simms.
Well, the referee was dramatic too. He goes like, if you watch he really wasn't. That was a no doubter. Thank God there was no instant replay back then.
Well,
they would have just reviewed the heck out of that until they would have given the Colts the game.
Well, I mean, it was a great call by the ref. You said thank God there's no instant replay, but imagine because if you watch it in full speed, it kind of looks like Bailey rolls over and catches it. And
it hit the ground.
But
once again, it's in low def too. Like
kudos to the ref for seeing that. Like he was right there. He saw.
It's such a difference between the games in low def and high def.
It is. Yeah. So yeah, the Steelers win. The Steelers overcome the 3 more yards thing. This time they win the championship game. Now they're headed to the Super Bowl. It really, that championship game has to be one of the greatest games in Steeler history, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I still like the game against Cleveland the year before, just because it was Cleveland, and it's always fun to beat Cleveland and Belichick in particular. But this was a big game. It put us in the Super Bowl, more significant than the other one.
Yeah, and dramatic too.
Dramatic, yeah. Ernie Mills, big catch.
Right.
Then we're still on the one, and Bam Morris, all 350 pounds of him, leaps 10 feet over the line to score. Yeah, it was a great game. It's one of the great games.
Indeed. Another fun fact, that was in the history of the AFC Championship game, there's only been 2 AFC Championship games that featured 2 teams that did not play in the old AFL, and that was one of them.
Both the NFL.
Yep.
And old NFL teams.
And the other game was the 2008 Championship game where the Steelers played the Ravens, because neither of those teams had been in the AFL either. Yeah. So now the Steelers advance to Super Bowl 30 in Tempe, Arizona. The opponent is the Dallas Cowboys. And there is just absolute huge hype for this game, right? So Dallas has a dynasty right now. They've already won 2 Super Bowls. They're going for their 3rd. It's a rematch of the 1970s Super Bowls, where the Steelers and Cowboys had played 2 dramatic games against each other in the 70s. To determine really who the team of that decade was. And whoever won this game, both of those franchises at the time had 4 Super Bowls. They were going to tie San Francisco for most Super Bowl wins with 5. So you have 2 of the NFL's flagship franchises, 2 of the NFL's flagship fan bases, It's just enormous hype. And in fact, it becomes the second most watched television program of all time, trailing only the final episode of MASH. I'm pretty sure that's been broken since then.
Yeah,
but at the
probably,
time,
yeah.
at the time, it's the second most watched television program ever. That's how much hype was into this game.
Was that before? Well, that would have been before. I can before after the OJ thing, because that's like highest rated too. The white Bronco.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I think that had happened the summer before, so it
It even beat the OJ.
Even
Wow.
beat OJ running away from the police.
Wow, nice.
The coach of the Cowboys at this time is Barry Switzer. Jerry Jones had probably the biggest mistake he ever made was forcing out Jimmy Johnson because of his massive ego, and Barry Switzer had taken over, and Barry Switzer had led the Cowboys back to the Super Bowl because he had just a stacked roster. But there were definitely like kinks in the armor, and you could see the Cowboys were starting to collapse is the wrong word, but definitely starting to go
They were
downhill.
fade, yeah.
They're fading.
Yeah, fade.
But here they are. They're back in the Super Bowl. Also back is Rod Woodson. Amazingly, had torn his ACL. The Steelers had left open a roster spot. Cowher left open a roster spot for him, and he comes back for this game. He came back in a very limited capacity, but he was back. That was a huge boost for the team. Both teams had dynamic offenses with like X factor players. The Steelers had Cordell, and Dallas Deion Sanders, who was, who we mentioned was their great cornerback, was also playing offense on select packages for the Cowboys. So the game starts after all this hype. The game finally starts. And in the first half, it's pretty clear that the Cowboys are a team that is playing in their third Super Bowl, and the Steelers are a team that's never been this far before.
yeah.
The Dallas just comes out firing. Troy Aikman, the Hall of Fame quarterback for the Cowboys, leads Dallas on 3 first-half scoring drives. The defense is focused heavily on stopping Emmitt Smith because that's really the Cowboys' probably their best player. They have this great offensive line. They have Emmitt Smith. And the defense, although the Cowboys marched down the field 3 times, the defense holds them to field goals on 2 of those drives. So it's 13-0 late in the second quarter, but it could have been much worse, much worse. The offense, meanwhile, is doing nothing and making mistakes. Dermontti Dawson, who is the Steelers Hall of Fame center, the only time that the Steelers even get in Cowboys territory, Dawson snaps the ball way over O'Donnell's head, and that ends that drive. But again, it's only 13-0, and then finally, right before halftime, the offense finally mounts a drive, and O'Donnell hits the NC Thigpen in the end zone with 13 seconds left. So despite being just thoroughly outplayed in the first half, the Steelers only trail by 6 points at halftime, which is amazing. I don't know, Steve. That's what I remember about that first half is just the Cowboys just rolled over us, but somehow it's only 13-7.
Yeah, they hung in there with them. The defense did. Unfortunately, I think the experience factor, that seems to be the common logic of that first half, is that the Cowboys had just been there and kind of knew how to handle it a little better, because there definitely is like a learning curve to getting into that big game situation.
Right.
And you see it almost every year, especially when you have 2 teams are both new to the Super Bowl. Normally you end up with a little bit of a choppy first quarter.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. So now you have the long halftime that you traditionally have in the Super Bowl.
Who was Diana Ross or
it
Michael
was
Jackson?
Diana Ross.
Diana Ross, all right.
Good memory.
Yes.
I wouldn't have remembered that.
Yes.
I only knew that because I was researching this game. So in the third quarter, the Steelers offense settles down, and now they start putting together a drive. And you're thinking, okay, this is where we take the lead or cut the lead, even more than 6 or even less than 6. And O'Donnell throws an interception to a Dallas cornerback named Larry Brown, who returns at 44 yards, leads to a touchdown, and now Dallas is up 20-7. That interception, which is the first of 2, it's bad. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it. If you watch the replay, the Cowboys blitz, O'Donnell seemingly panics, and he throws the ball to the right side of the field, and there's no Steeler players within 20 yards. the two receivers on that side had already cut over to the other side of the field. There's nobody even close. I don't really know what Larry Brown was even doing over there, because he's covering nobody. If you watch
the 40-yard
overhead
line might have scored.
I mean, if you look like at the big overhead angle, he's standing out there on an island. And there were people after this game that said, "Oh, Neal threw the Super Bowl on purpose and Jerry Jones paid him a bunch of money." And I don't believe any of that. But when you watch that replay, I think that's what gives fuel to that fire, because literally Brown's inexplicably covering grass, and O'Donnell throws to a spot where there's nobody even close. So it's just it's a terrible play, terrible interception. Cowboys are now up 20-7. The Steelers get the ball back and try to sort of overcome that, but Bam Morris is stuffed on a 4th and 1 attempt. They turn the ball over on downs, and now it looks like, okay, that was really our chance to come back. Now this is going to turn into the typical NFC team blows out the AFC team, but it doesn't, because the defense continues to really hold strong. The defense continues to shut down Emmitt Smith in that running game. Rod Woodson breaks up a big 3rd down pass to Deion Sanders, and there's a great picture of him pointing with 2 fingers at his knee.
Yeah.
Yep. And so the fourth quarter starts. It's still 20-7. The Steelers mount a drive to get a field goal, so now it's 20-10 in the fourth quarter. And at this point, Cowher just says, "You know what? I'm just going to push all my chips to the middle of the table," and he calls for a surprise onside kick.
Bobby April called for it. Everybody gets on. Bobby April did suggest it, but it was obviously Cowher's final decision.
Obviously, Cowher's decision, and so they do a surprise onside kick. The Cowboys are not ready for it at all, and then the ghost of Deion Figures, who, again, he didn't play that whole season, but he's playing special teams in that game. He recovers the onside kick. O'Donnell has now steadied himself, starts leading this team down the field, and they get to the 1 yard line, and they execute a great block, and Bam Morris literally walks untouched into the end zone. And now all of a sudden it's 20-17, and Dallas is getting nervous. They have to kick the ball back to the Cowboys. On the ensuing possession, Levon Kirkland, who honestly I think would have been the MVP had the Steelers won this game. He was just dominant in this game. Literally knocks Aikman backwards for a huge sack, and Dallas has to punt. It's a play where he hits Aikman, and Aikman literally stumbles backwards and falls down. And so now the Steelers get the ball back at their own 32-yard line. There's about 4 minutes left in the game. They're only down by 3 points. They have all the momentum, and now it's Neal's moment, right? It's his chance to go down and win the Super Bowl, and he throws another interception to Brown, and it's almost a mirror image of the first interception. It's on that same side of the field. There's not really a Steeler receiver near him. And Brown returns the interception deep into the Cowboys' territory. They quickly score a touchdown right after that, and now there's not enough time. The game is over, and the Cowboys win 27-17. And that second interception, there's a little more debate about that one. Andre Hastings, it was another blitz where O'Donnell kind of unloaded the ball on a blitz. Andre Hastings, the receiver, was supposed to. O'Donnell said he was supposed to cut outside on a blitz like that. Hastings said I was supposed to cut inside. So O'Donnell threw to a spot where he thought Hastings would be. Hastings was on the other side. Whatever the reason, it's Larry Brown picks off the ball again by covering grass. And I think that's all anybody remembers. And it's a painful loss. I mean, it was painful because everybody hated Dallas back then, not just in Pittsburgh. I think Dallas was widely hated by a lot of people with that team, with Michael Irvin and Deion Sanders and those guys. So seeing them win a third Super Bowl just was hard. But then seeing the Steelers lose in a game where they had, in the second half, the Steelers outgained the Cowboys in yards 201-61. Outgained them in first downs 25-15. And the Dallas running game, 56 yards. That's all they got in the second half.
That's your Hall of Famer there.
I mean, yeah. And so with those numbers, the Steelers should have won that game, but they didn't. because of the interceptions. And it's so ironic because we talked about earlier, right, that O'Donnell's game was he was safe. He would take a sack. And that was frustrating. All those years, you watched O'Donnell take a 10-yard sack instead of trying to throw the ball away or trying to throw the ball into coverage. But that was his game. Play it safe. And going into Super Bowl 30, he was the NFL's all-time leader in fewest interceptions per pass attempt. And he throws 2 interceptions to Larry Brown, who's named the game's MVP for covering grass.
Well, I think it illustrates to the more of an overarching theme is it's the difference between like great quarterbacks and good quarterbacks.
Yes.
O'Donnell's a good quarterback. Like Mark Rippon's a good quarterback. Jeff Hostetler, good quarterback. Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Terry Bradshaw, John Elway, you're talking great quarterbacks. If that's one of those guys, John Elway steps out of the way. Ben Roethlisberger scrambles around. Marino uses his quick release to defeat that blitz. And it's a to quote Bill Cowher, it's a fine line between winning and losing, and I think that's what we kind of bumped into there was, that just got a little too big, and you even saw it, with the Super Bowl with San Francisco and just this year,
Kansas City.
Yeah, and Garoppolo had a guy wide open late, and that's the difference between a guy that's good and a guy that's great. Tom Brady hits that pass.
Yeah.
Peyton Manning probably hits that, but
Yeah.
it's just the difference. It's hard to criticize. O'Donnell was still a good quarterback, but you needed to make just one. If he makes not one of those interceptions, it's maybe a different game.
Yeah. No, that's a really good. I mean, greatness. You really want to talk about, especially in the Super Bowl, greatness. So those guys you mentioned, Montana, Brady, Ben, even Eli Manning.
Yeah.
When they had the ball down by a certain amount of points late in the game, all those guys led game-winning drives to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the last year's Super Bowl, Mahomes had a terrible game.
Yeah.
But you know what? With 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter, he leads the team down and wins the game because that's greatness.
Yeah.
And O'Donnell never had greatness.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that happens. And another great was Brown was on Married with Children, an episode of Married with Children, and they made the joke, yeah, you got MVP for covering grass. They actually made that joke on Married with Children. So
Nice.
I don't know what Larry Brown was doing in Al Bundy's shoe store, but he was there. So
He
made a lot of money off of covering grass.
He did. He got to sign a big free agent deal with the Raiders and was never really that good, which wasn't surprising. He had one of their other defensive backs picked off that second pass, Brock Marion or whoever their other defensive backs were. If that had been a different guy, that game has no MVP. Like there was nobody else to.
They probably just picked Emmitt Smith or.
He had 56 years. Yeah,
Trey Aikman or somebody.
They would have had to pick somebody, obviously, but there really wasn't an MVP. Again, the Steelers really had dominated that whole second half, so just hurt. And one of the enduring images from that game, NFL Films had mic'd up Cowher, and there's a famous clip of him walking off the field, and his daughter Megan comes up to greet him, and he's trying to hold it together. Like, you and I both have daughters. It's like you want to hold it together. Like you're really upset, but you want to be strong for your kids. And Cowher's just trying so hard to hold it together. And he just goes, oh, you win some, you lose some. But he's like trying, like he's choking back tears.
Well, did you ever see and then there's like one of the NFL handlers there. It's like some young guy in a suit. And he's like trying to do the, I'm just here to keep people away, but this is a very uncomfortable moment. Like, you've had oh, why am I here for somebody kill me.
Yeah, probably not where that guy wanted to be at the time. So the aftermath, O'Donnell, after the season, leaves for the Jets in free agency, holds a press conference proclaiming that, quote, you play your whole career for a shot at free agency, kind of showing you where Neil's priorities were. And then he proceeds to go 1-15 with the Jets in 1996. And never even comes close to matching the success he had in Pittsburgh. There's a three-way battle for the starting quarterback job the following season. It's initially won by Jim Miller, but then the job's handed to Tom Zach after Miller kind of plays poorly in the first game. And Tom Zach's okay, but he as the season wears on, it's clear that he was a good backup quarterback, not a good starting quarterback. He becomes a turnover machine. The Steelers make the playoffs, but they're blown out in the divisional round in New England. Gailey's promoted to offensive coordinator, but the offense is beset by injuries to Thigpen and Mills. Mills actually got hurt in the fourth quarter
of the Super Bowl. Yeah.
Yep, and never really recovers. Bam Morris.
Next year, he left for free agency. He had a great career with Carolina, actually.
Yep. Bam Morris gets arrested in a few months after that Super Bowl. He has like lots and lots of cocaine in his car and gets released. He never comes close to reproducing his success. And so really Cowher kind of just goes back to that Marty Ball formula after that season. They don't have the same dynamic offense anymore. And Cowher has a lot of success, but he also loses 3 more AFC Championship games at home before, with Ben Roethlisberger finally making it back to and winning the Super Bowl a full decade later in 2005.
Yeah, it really, really makes you appreciate. I think, though, the losses sometimes make you appreciate. I mean, Super Bowl 40, that's like just one of my favorite. That's one of my my favorite Steeler game of all time. I know, it's not the greatest Super Bowl ever played, but, I mean, you had to wait. I mean, I didn't really, start watching Steelers was 92. I had to wait till 2004 to see, And you look at some of these other fan bases, every other year they're in the championship game or winning. We didn't get a sniff, and we had some teams that were pretty good, too. And it's just once again, it goes back to kind of that, do you have that good quarterback or do you have a great quarterback?
Right.
And once again, Cordell was kind of like one of those, he's good, but he's not great. And that was until they got somebody that was great and was definitely top tier, that's when they finally started to win championships.
Yeah.
You just can't win. Like in the old NFL, you used to be able to win, like I said, with a Jeff Hostetler, Mark Rippon,
Right.
even Tampa Bay, who they had Brad Johnson that
Right.
one year, like good quarterbacks. But now with the way the rules are in the league, if you don't have a great quarterback, you're not going to win the Super Bowl.
That great defense, game manager, quarterback thing, it can still work. But the problem is if the defense collapses at any point, like the defense did against San Diego in the championship game, or whatever. Like San Francisco, we were talking about last year's Super Bowl. San Francisco had that formula last year, but then they collapsed in the fourth quarter. Their defense collapsed against Kansas City, and then
you don't necessarily even need a running game. Like you can win with a great quarterback and a good defense.
Yeah.
I mean, Denver did that 2 years in a row. So
yeah, I think NFL history is just littered with teams like those Cowher era Steelers teams where they had really good teams, but they didn't have the great quarterback that could really win it when they needed him to, and that's what they needed from Neil O'Donnell in that game, and that's what they didn't get.
So we're just throwing Neil under the bus.
Well, like you said, it wasn't like Neil was a bad quarterback. He was a good quarterback. That's his legacy in Pittsburgh. He lost the Super Bowl. He threw 2 interceptions in the second half of the Super Bowl.
And he never got another sniff, like you said. I don't even think he even made it to another Super Bowl, did he?
Oh, no, he didn't. He didn't do anything.
He played for Tennessee for a while in Cincinnati.
He backed up Steve McNair. He played for Cincinnati. He played for the Jets. Yeah, he never did anything after that. And that was his choice. He wanted to leave and sign a big contract. Had he stayed in Pittsburgh, maybe things turn out different. Maybe they don't. Who knows?
And it kind of goes back to what we're saying with all the people leaving Pittsburgh, and then another disappointing loss after '94 and after Sid Bream, and now the Pirates are stinking and Barry Bonds stinks. And I mean, I guess we still kind of had the Penguins. Mario was still there, I think.
But it was a lot of tough losses, right, in succession.
And then Yager did leave, a couple of years later. So
well, there were just a bunch. You mentioned the Sid Bream. You had the David Volek game against the Islanders. That was in '93. '94, you had the Chargers, and then '95, you had the Super Bowl.
So there were a lot of heartbreaking losses.
A lot of devastating losses in succession, and it was weird because we talked about in that previous podcast how the '80s were just this miserable decade of Pittsburgh sports. We were never contending for anything. So you didn't have any of those moments because you didn't have any good teams. You get into the 90s, everybody's good. All 3 teams all of a sudden are good. But then you have, these heartbreaking moments. So the 95 Steelers season, I mean, it's strange because I remember it was a great season, and they did overcome the 3 more yards thing. They redeemed that championship game loss, but then so that's great.
Yeah, but then they lose in the
But
Super
then they
Bowl
lose the Super Bowl
to like one of our bigger rival teams too,
Right.
like the Cowboys.
Right. So
Yeah.
so kind of a mixed bag. Memorable season, good season, but definitely
Bittersweet.
bittersweet.
Yeah.
Yes,
Good way to put it.
absolutely. Any final thoughts, Steve?
Bittersweet season made me appreciate, like I said, sometimes when you have to wait for something and it takes a couple more years than you thought you would. I think I was spoiled by the Penguins Stanley Cups like early. I thought, oh, we're just going to do this every year. Wow. And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? It ain't that easy to win a championship. It makes you, as you get older, you appreciate things a little more. And, you appreciate the players and how hard they work. And just 3 more yards. We just needed 3 more. Or 1 less interception, I guess, in that Super Bowl.
Yes, that would have helped greatly. Well, thanks everybody for listening. If you like the podcast, please leave us a review, and we'll catch you next time.